Well, I am really pleased today to introduce Lauren Kroiz, who is from the Art History Department. And in the course of the Global Urban Humanities Initiative, in which we're having, for example, film professors jointly teaching courses with city planning professors, one thing that we're looking at is what are the tools that we bring to bear from our various disciplines when we look at cities. And when you're talking about tools, I think all of us, whatever discipline we're in, are all guilty of holding a hammer in our hand and seeing everything as a nail. But when we borrow tools across disciplines, sometimes we learn things. And sometimes if you're holding the same hammer in your hand, you use it slightly differently. So for example, the method of interviewing is used by anthropologists, it's used by people in performance studies, it's used by journalists. It's all used a little differently. But some folks are coming from a completely different place and may take a hammer and be unfamiliar with it and think, this is a good paperweight. Or if you turn it upside down, it kind of rocks. You could use it, to make a little rocking chair out of it or something. And I think artists sometimes are especially able to bring some of those new ideas to the tools that we use. I'm really excited to have an expert in analyzing images. Art historians think about images all the time. I'm a city planner. I also worked in real estate development and regulating development, so I've been very much out in the nuts and bolts world, where we tend to use images in a very instrumental way, as if they are representing reality, and we don't stop to reflect on them very much. And I think even folks in the planning profession, outside of real estate development, do that as well. And I think it's really useful to have experts like Lauren, who spend a lot of time analyzing how we receive images, to shed some light on how they're used. Lauren wrote a great book called Creative Composites, Modernism, Race, and the Stieglitz Circle. And she looked at the history of photography. And what was especially interesting to me was the way she looked at the kind of constructed divisions among media between photography, painting, other arts, and analogs with the constructions of differences among race. And I'm not portraying this very well, but it was so interesting to me because this is kind of what we're doing in the Global Urban Humanities Initiative as we are working across disciplines from architecture, anthropology, film studies. We're trying to figure out, is it okay to borrow each other's tools and misuse them? Is it okay to use a hammer as a paperweight? What happens when you do that? And we've encountered a lot of kind of discomfort because sometimes we think people are misusing our tools. But I think something can be learned from that discomfort. Last time, each session, I'm introducing a word of the day to try to kind of tie together this very disparate set of speakers that we have over the course of the semester. And today, last week I talked about plan, and okay, so today's word is image, and I brought up the word image in part because we have an expert on images here, but also because there's a very important book in Theories of Urban Design called The Image of the City by Kevin Lynch, and this is a real classic. And the way Kevin Lynch uses the word image, I think, is different from some of the ways that it may be used by art historians. And the plans that we talked about last week are a kind of image. And last week we were talking about the temporal aspect of plans. That is, the word plan usually refers, not always, but sometimes refers to something happening in the future. Spatially, it refers to something that you are looking down on. The conventional use of the word plan in architecture and planning is that you're looking straight down on something. As we were looking straight down on this person, and we were talking about how cartographers conventionally are always looking at things in plan view from top down, which is an incomplete view, just as it's incomplete to look at a person only when you're looking at the top of their head. In the images that Lauren's going to talk about will more likely, rather than looking in plan view, will be looking straight on in elevation or perspective view, which has its own issues. But back to the word image. Kevin Lynch gives us a guide to thinking about the image of the city, not as it's represented in painting or photography. He's talking about the internal image that we carry in our minds and that we construct by moving through a city. And if we look at the word image in the dictionary definition, it comes from the same Latin root as imitation. So the first definition is a reproduction or imitation of the form of a person or thing, especially an imitation in solid form, a statue. So it's interesting that although when I hear the word image, I tend to think of two-dimensional representations. Originally, it often referred to a three-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional thing. The second definition is the optical counterpart of an object produced by an optical device as a lens or mirror or an electronic device. So where are this? It's a lot more abstract already, right? What does this mean? Well, it kind of means a picture. So the optical counterpart, you could say a JPEG, is a kind of picture, and it's a set of algorithms that can be rendered into something we can look at. So that's another kind of picture. A third definition is an exact likeness, a semblance. And I love the example, God created man in his own image, because that's one of the hard, what is an exact image of God? It's just such a wonderfully problematic example to use as far as what an exact likeness is. Last week we looked at a plan of the Russian city of Berkeley, and this was a plan that purported to show the past, present, and future of this mining town as it should be developed. But when we considered the essay that the maker of this map wrote, saying that actually this is not what it's like at all, this is not a likeness, this is kind of fake, we saw that an image is not always a real likeness. Finally, we get to image in the way that Kevin Lynch talks about the image of a city, and that is a mental picture or impression of something, or second, a mental conception held in common by members of the group and symbolic of a basic attitude and orientation. So these, in this sense, it's not a representation, but it's something in our heads or perhaps in our bodies, although we can't talk about it until we get it out of our heads, out of our bodies. And I was a little distracted by the examples here. I loved the mental picture. The example was, had a negative body image of herself. It's kind of curious that the dictionary writers, the first thing that occurred to them was the woman's negative body image of herself. The second example was that a disorderly courtroom can seriously tarnish a community's image of justice, and that what represents, real justice and functioning justice system is an orderly courtroom is also kind of an interesting concept. But anyway, I digress. These were just kind of distractions. So image, as Kevin Lynch uses the word, is about our understanding of moving through a city. And this is his portrayal of a mental map of Boston. And you can see here is Back Bay, if you know Boston, and here is the Public Garden, and here is Boston Common. The way that he made this map was by interviewing people who lived and worked in Boston. And what Kevin Lynch is interested in is nodes, paths, landmarks, and districts, because in his conception, this is how we understand space in cities. But he didn't ask people, well, tell me about the nodes, tell me about the edges, because those are not words people normally use. But he said, what do you remember? Because memorability is closely linked with imageability for Kevin Lynch. So he asked them what was important to them. He compiled these and made a composite of these verbal representations of memories of the city, and then using his own system of symbols, he then represented this composite for many people in 2 dimensions, in plan view. And it's something that's extremely useful. It's widely used in urban design and urban planning, this kind of collection of information represented in 2 dimensions by and professional, but it's an extremely mediated image, an extremely mediated plan, as you can see. And because he's interested first and foremost in urban form, he's not thinking so much about the ways that images such as murals or art or film also shape people's understandings of the city as they move through it. But I think that it might be interesting if we start thinking more and connecting those representations through art of the city with our understanding of cities as we move through them and as we make decisions about how to build them. And with that, I'd like to introduce Lauren, who's going to talk about a very interesting mural here in Berkeley. Do you like presenter view?
Sure. And then I can see.
You can choose whatever.
Yeah. Thanks, Susan. Thanks to you guys for coming today. Can everybody see this good enough for me to do anything else with the lights? It's really dark glass. I don't want to put that. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's good. Does everybody like this? Okay. Let's see if I can still see. Yeah, more or less. So thanks to Susan and thank you all for coming. I'm going to try to keep it fairly short today, assuming that I can still see my clock, which in fact I can, because I want to be sure to leave time for questions and for your insights. I've really only been in Berkeley for a year, and I was looking around, and it seems like a lot of you may have not been here that much longer than me. So who's been here for longer than a year? Okay, so we got about half, and about half of you are new people like me. So what I'm interested in today, and what I'm thankful that Susan introduced, is the concept of the image. The way that the city might represent itself to itself or to its citizens, and what that might mean, what that might help us think through. So I've really also I just moved here, I also just started thinking about Bearden's Berkeley mural. But I jumped at the chance to present it here today because I think it's such a really interesting historical attempt to create an image of the city that attempts to evoke for its viewers what you were thinking through here, kind of combined reading and sensing of Berkeley. And we'll talk about the way, or I'll talk about the way that the mural does that today. So this all started out with me taking out the trash. If we were thinking about what the methodologies of different disciplines are, historians often look to the trash. We look to things that other people have thrown away to the past. Here, in particular, I look to my trash can. And here you can see, who's seen the City of Berkeley logo? Raise your hand. Hasn't everybody? Okay, so everybody has not seen the City of Berkeley logo. It's on here. You can just look around when it's trash day. Because it's on the trash cans, it's on all of this, it's on the city's like police cars, it's pretty much on everything. So I think this is a weird logo. It's mostly this part, the heart of the green valley kind of comes and goes depending on what you're looking at. So what are the faces doing there? How do they symbolize Berkeley? It's a really ambiguous image. And if you look like at your recycling bin, this is the logo for the Ecology Center, it's much more clear what the Ecology Center wants us to associate them with. They want us to associate them with like a rising sun and a lovely landscape. As opposed to the City of Berkeley logo, which is like 4 faces looking the same direction. Are they all really close to each other? What's happening? So if we look at the top, we don't even have to leave our trash cans to see the logo in color and realize that, hopefully you can realize here with the different colored skin tones of each of these faces, that this mural has something intrinsic to do with race. It's an idea, I think, as we see it play out in the instantiation of what this logo looks like. It's an idea that seems, at some level, contemporary, politically progressive. Berkeley is a city defined by the many races within it. But then it's also kind of not. It's not an image that we would necessarily invent in 2010 four races are such a loaded symbol. It doesn't give us a space for mixed race people. There's a lot going on that seems to root this image in a place and time that is maybe not exactly our own. So these are just the things that I think about when I take out the trash. And as I walked around the city for about 6 months, I would think about it when I would see a trash can, I would think about it when I would see a police car, whenever I saw the city logo. I was like, I think this has to come from somewhere, but where does it come from? So I didn't have any time to do any research, but luckily, when I was prepping for a class on public art that I also teach, I realized that the image did come from somewhere. This is a symbol that comes from Romare Bearden's 1973 mural entitled Berkeley-The City and Its People. And hopefully you can see the logo down here, what's become the logo down here. It doesn't start out as the logo. In fact, the city takes it from this work of art. Has anybody seen this mural? Raise your hand if you have. So it's matter. Have you seen the actual thing or a representation of it? So
It was in a show at the Museum of Modern Art recently.
Mm-hmm.
The Romare Bearden show.
Yeah, it was a show. It was in a show curated by the National Gallery that traveled to the Museum of Modern Art. So it's originally intended for a space in what at the time was City Hall and what we now know as Old City Hall, which is, I show you the image of the City Hall here because I realize you might not all know where it is. You can see it probably in the photo collage too. But it's the building that's on the west side of Civic Center Plaza in downtown Berkeley. And this is a 1909 building that the story of this building is going to come back a little bit at the end of the story that I'm telling about the mural. But this is a mural that's created for the council chambers of the Old City Hall. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how the mural came to Berkeley and what that might mean for us as at least temporary residents of this city. So if we look, here's the old, it took me a little while to dig up the old logo of the City of Berkeley, which is still the seal of the city. So it's obviously a portrait of philosopher Charles Barclay, who the city takes its name from. You wouldn't probably be surprised to see that on your trash can. It's like the symbol, it's a typical symbol of city-state power, let's say. So then we have one great white man with curly hair. But then we have a transition to this logo in the 70s. And I wanted to think a little bit more about what this logo does what the second logo does that the first mural doesn't. And then hopefully that can help us think through what the mural itself does and the way in which it might circulate in our visual vocabulary. So here I'm going to show you, I thought that Susan brought us back to the image that she showed last time, that planning diagram. So this is a cornerstone of art history, the comparative method, the two-slide analysis. If you've taken an art history class, you've probably done this before. So I was hoping that what we could do for a little while today as a group is to think through the similarities and differences, to do a kind of formal analysis of these images. So what would you say, what are the similarities or what are the differences?
They're both compartmentalized, so you've got different regions that are divided by lines.
Right, so we have different regions in each that are divided by lines. How does that work here?
The campanile and the wooden structure at the side.
Right, so that we have this wood, we have strong verticals. This is actually literally in 6 pieces, so it comes apart. And I'll show you an image of that later. It comes apart on this kind of grid. So that we can say this one is divided by vertical lines. They're compartmentalized.
It would speak to the past, present, and future. They're not limited to one instance of time.
Exactly. So we've talked already about how this one speaks to the past, present, and future by the different color palette that's used. How do you see this one as speaking to the past, present, and future?
I could see a lot of hope there. I mean, and it also shows what exists, and it also shows, you know, images of the past as well.
Yeah, so we've got these images of settlers down at the bottom. Nobody was out in the bay in a schooner, even in the 1970s. So that he's referring back to these different historical moments, both on land and in water. We've got the Ohlone people down here, and I'll talk a little bit more about the iconography of this mural in a little bit, but I think that's exactly right. It helps us think through the past, the present, maybe the future, and this kind of kitschy rainbow up at the top. What else? Any differences? Well, you guys aren't all trained art historians. Go ahead.
I mean, there are a lot of people in the one, and there's a kind of an absence of human presence in the other.
Excellent. So we have a lot of people in the one on the left. We see not just the structure of the city, but the inhabitants of the city as well. How about in the back?
The collage, they're both collages, but the collage on the right is blended, and the one on the left is more disparate.
You're a genius. Yeah, so we can think through the ways in which, the physical ways in which these are made, which is what art historians do a lot, so that we think through the materiality of the image. So we could say that these are both collages in a certain way. This one made from literally like taking photographs and then clipping them out, whereas this one's made from a software collage. And as we talked about, Susan talked about last time, the author of this one said that he put in the clouds to kind of ease the transition, to make it appear as if it was inevitable, as if it was smooth, like that the transitions between the compartmentalization that Victoria pointed to, as if those things were inevitable. Whereas here, so you guys can hopefully see, you have the same kind of borders, but they almost read as disjunctions. We get a collage, we really, our attention is drawn to disjunction. This wouldn't maybe be an awesome plan. You would think that this building is clearly going to fall down because it's a whole bunch of pieces all on top of each other. But it works. We want to say that it's celebrating the disjunctions of people, people's experiences moving through the city. It's really celebrating the gaps between things. It's celebrating a relationship, which I'll talk a little bit more about, a relationship between particularity and abstraction. So you can probably see in some of these details, we have like people whose noses, especially down here, like this guy is a face, but then the nose is somebody else's face, so that we have a real attention to the characteristics of collage, of these people who might not be in the same physical space coming together in this mural. And this is in keeping, you guys probably know, especially if you looked at any of the reading for today, this is in keeping with Bearden's broader use of photo collage. So here I show you two pieces entitled The Conjure Woman, the one on the left from 1964, and the one on the right from 1971. And one of the readings that's up on the website for today is from art historian Rachel Duluth, and she takes the use of Bearden's term conjure here in the titles quite seriously to argue that these works, his photo collages, his practice of photo collage, is used as a way to conjure a new world. So that in seeing the disjunctions and seeing things that maybe shouldn't go together, we think intuitively shouldn't go together, brought together, Bearden's also suggesting not just a new way to make pictures, but a new way to make the world, a new way to inhabit the world. So people in Berkeley would have known these images, and here I give you just a couple more. The one on the top left is called Cotton Pickers, and it's from 1941, and it's currently in the collection of the Berkeley Art Museum, which is where people in Berkeley knew Romare Bearden's work from, because there was a Bearden retrospective that was organized by the Museum of Modern Art in 1971, and it traveled to the Berkeley Art Museum under the guidance of Peter Seltz, who was the very famous early director of what was then known as the University Art Museum. So people in Berkeley in the early 1970s, like 1970, 1971, are experiencing this Bearden show at BAM, what will become BAM, and they're also really worried about their dreary, drabby city hall. As you can see here, the drab decor. And what is a little hard to tell in this image, but what was previously there is a large just photo mural, so it's just a big photograph, basically, of the city of Berkeley. I haven't been able to figure out what exactly it is, and then it's, we know, flanked by portraits of Washington and Lincoln. And there's a civic arts commission that's just gotten off the ground in this moment, and it's charged with refurbishing city council chambers. So here's what it looked like up until a couple of years ago with the Romare Bearden mural in this space. You can see the space is the same, and the amount of space that the mural takes up is the same, but the composition radically altered. So what they said they were looking for, the Civic Commission, they said they were looking for, quote, decor more relevant to the citizens of present-day Berkeley. So what they meant by that is that they didn't want portraits of these white guys, portraits of Lincoln, portraits of Washington. They didn't want to invest in more of that. Rather, what they wanted was to find something that would represent the diversity of the city of Berkeley, both in terms of its geography, of its class, and also then in terms of race. So they asked the council, the commission, has only recently gotten off the ground, so it looks to two artists who have been instrumental in building a collection of African American art for the University Art Museum here at Berkeley. And the names of those artists are Russell T. Gordon, told you I just started this research, Russell T. Gordon, who's at Berkeley, and Raymond Saunders, who's at Cal State Hayward in that moment, which is now Cal State East Bay, and then he moves to the California College of Art. So these are two artists who I hope to explore more in like a longer version of this paper to think about the way in which they understand race in relationship to abstraction. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to get into that now, but except to tell you that there are artists in the community that are instrumental in bringing Romare Bearden to Berkeley. And this is all, of course, also in league with his Romare Bearden's retrospective being at the Berkeley Art Museum. People are casting about for what we should put in this drab decor, and they say, well, why don't we have a mural? And when they think through what a mural could be, they think to this work, which is Romare Bearden's The Block from 1971. And this, like Berkeley, a city and its people, is cut and pasted printed colored metallic papers along with photo collage on top of it. So the work is mostly paper-based. This one, which is interesting, included sound along with it. So it was more like we might think of as an installation. So this was kind of, it's really big. It's like more than 11 feet by 18 feet. And it was kind of the hit of the show. You can imagine it, BAM is the University Art Museum is in the space that BAM is now moving out of. So it really took over that space. So people in Berkeley were really familiar with this. And when they were trying to figure out what a mural might be, they decided to look to this work and to look to Romare Bearden. This is a street scene, meant to be a street scene in Harlem, which is where Romare Bearden practices. And the work that we have, Berkeley, a city and its people, is actually really unique in Romare Bearden's larger oeuvre, larger body of work, because it's one of the rare things that he did of a place that he wasn't from, a place that he didn't really spend that much time in. He ends up coming to Berkeley in 1973, and he spends 10 days here, going around, taking photographs. He's taken on a tour by the Civic Arts Commission and by those artists that I already talked about who become sort of his friends and couriers here. So this is also his unique because it's his largest known work on paper. And it's commissioned for $16,000 then, which was actually quite a lot more money than the Civic Arts Commission had, but they raised money from the NEA and from the citizens. And it's now insured at over $2 million, so just to give you a sense of where we are with the worth. And what did Romare Bearden do when he was here? He really tried to get the primary sources of the time trying to say that he tried to get an overview of everybody in Berkeley. So he went to, for instance, on his first Sunday, he went to services at a black church, went to telegraph for the music that was being played on the street that week. He visited the Rose Gardens, and he visited a few private homes up in the hills. He walked down to the marina. He walked through the Bayview district, and he was taken to dinner at the Claremont Hotel. Who's done all those things, even in their lifetime in Berkeley? Okay, so he's really packing it in. But we should say too that he's packing it in a way that's curated. He's not actually living in the city for like a long period to come up with these things. He's being taken around and showed at some level the greatest hits of Berkeley. And then he goes back to his studio in New York, and he creates this from the images that he's taken, the photographs and the impressions, the memories that he has of the city of Berkeley. And it's a piece, as I said, that comes apart into panels. This is the reinstallation after it was on view at the National Gallery. So just to give you a sense of the kind of scale of the work and also the way in which it comes apart. The panels aren't a standard size, but they are all rectilinear. So let's see. I feel like I want to move to talk to you guys pretty quickly, but I'm going to give you a sense at least of what's in here. So I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's actually in this mural as a way to begin reading it. So this is an art historical thing that's often known as like iconology. You have to figure out what's in the painting, what we see based on not just our understanding from the present, but also what people at the time would have seen. So here we see the Bay Bridge, Sather Gate. So you can see that side is sort of campus, Sather Tower, the Campanile, the Berkeley Pier, Henry Durant, one of the founders of the university. Then there's the train. So you can think through the way in which even in Bearden's mural, that sound, we might think of it as having, it doesn't have any sound associated with it, unlike the block, but we see within it things that make sound, like the train. The fact that almost anywhere in Berkeley you can hear the train. These are the Ohlone native people and the early white settlers to Berkeley. Then we have some other university stuff, football and graduation. Then there's the Berkeley Art Museum. Some peace activists, very 1970s. The Sunflower House, which is in West Berkeley. And then we see here an African-American woman and her son. They're talked about in the period as looking like defiant and happy. This is seen as a mural that's quite, as you said, positive and hopeful about the future of Berkeley. So then we have Old City Hall, the place that the mural is going to be displayed, embedded in the mural. The Buddhist temple on Channing, the left side is sort of all about religion. St. John's Presbyterian, and then the Maybeck Church. We also have like a little rose in here that maybe is from his trip to the Rose Garden. There's some things I haven't been able to identify. If anybody knows what this is, tell me. If anybody knows who this guy is, I think he's super important, but I don't know how yet. So I gotta find some people who've been in Berkeley for a while. Let's go back to the whole mural, the mural without the label. So we can pull out all the details, I want to say, all the works that make this work as a kind of guidebook of Berkeley. But what's also important about this mural, I think, is the way in which it sets specific places in the city into play, the way it complicates the particular against the symbolic. So as one of the reviews of the period said, it uses photographs of real people are used to typify students, workers, teachers, and citizens. But the blown up photographs of these real people has features from other faces collaged onto them, so that the individual noses and eyes find themselves on other faces. So there's a way in which here we see, as we discuss the individuals, we see the people of the city, but we see those people as both particular and also symbolic of a larger interweaving of people that occurs in the city. So the fact that we're surrounded by people, that characterizes the city, that we're constantly encountering strangers in a way that we might not other places, that we're constantly encountering them and mixing with them. So now, when I look at my trash can, that very symbolic portion down at the bottom, I think that we can best understand that logo when we see it as referring us back to the mural, that we best understand the city and the city of Berkeley as a kind of in the interplay between the abstract and the particular, to be attentive to the strange cracks and the disjunctions, what we see as the hallmark of this photo collage style. It's a weird means of representation that might conjure up new ways and new places, new ideas of how we can possibly live in the city, new ways that we might relate to each other. So I want to close now by pointing out that the logo is actually all that remains in public of this mural. It's no longer on public view. Old City Hall has been deemed seismically unsound, so everybody's had to move out of there, and they moved the mural out too. It's really up for grabs. Some of you probably know it's really up for grabs what's going to happen with Old City Hall. So I was talking to the civic arts coordinator now for the City of Berkeley, and she said that I should conclude by asking if anybody has any ideas about where they can put this mural. It's really big. It's 10 by 16. They've consulted with the Berkeley Art Museum, who's reluctant, obviously, to take it on forever because it is so big and they can't always have it on permanent view. So if anybody has any ideas, feel free to let me know. Because I think it's a really great symbol and a really great representation, image even, of Berkeley at its people. We'll turn the lights on now, and if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to share them. Oh, maybe we should turn them off so we can see them. We'll figure it out.
Thinking back to the juxtaposition of the map and the mural, the mural image is so self-referential to Bearden and his life and his aesthetic. Like, his mode of collage was slotted in with Harlem Renaissance and like jazz itself. So like jumping from image to image in that way, like staccato beats against saturated color, is so much about the historical moment and geographic place that he lived. So it's so successful in the block collage that you showed us, and that's like from his own vernacular culture, his own city. And visually it feels less successful to me and less like Berkeley to use that sort of staccato jumping in this place, which is generally more like fluid and mellifluous and laid back, and these sort of like pockets of neighborhoods that are like flowing to each other in a different way than New York City blocks do. So it feels stuck on and inauthentic, and like it doesn't feel like Berkeley to look at that picture in the same way that it feels like Harlem to look at the others.
Right. So what it means to have an image that feels like the city, what do we mean for a city to be represented? And so this mural has been pretty much like celebrated in the period. There's people saying similar things to what you're saying. Not that it looks like Harlem, but rather that it tries to do too much, so ends up doing too little, that it tries to kind of represent too much. I like what you said in terms of the way in which the style comes out of Harlem, because there's also a way to argue the failure of this mural, the way in which this mural might not be as good as Romare Bearden's other work, by saying that it's a place that he didn't know as well, so that's what makes it somehow inauthentic. I don't know if I totally buy that. I do like what you're saying about a style that comes out of a particular place and that comes out of a particular experience. That doesn't mean he has a totally seamless relationship to New York, because there's another image that I didn't have a chance to show of a mural called The Block 2, which he tries to do for a public commission in New York. People hate it. It becomes so controversial. It's really hard to find good images of it because it's been moved to a hospital and sort of in a very private part of a hospital. It has a three-dimensional element to it, which was part of what made people annoyed. That's from 1976, if you're interested. But I think what's provocative, I guess, or exceptional to me about Bearden's mural is the way that it's accepted by, it's uncontroversially accepted by the city of Berkeley and becomes like a symbol of the city of Berkeley in a way that is unique amongst U.S. cities, especially that I know. Interesting.
I'm kind of curious about if you know about what, because it's in the 70s, right? Do you know anything about the social climate of Berkeley at that time that might have had to influence the story the city wanted to tell about itself?
Yeah.
In choosing an African American artist?
The city is crazy is the short answer. The city is crazy in 1973 because I've just been sort of doing research around this. It's a little bit difficult to figure it out, but the really, really progressive slate of candidates wins. So the civic Hall in that period, people write about how they don't need the soundtrack from the block because it is contentious anyway. There's going to be a lot of yelling in the City Hall, but I think you're exactly right that it's this new, a new progressive set of people. Two of them are African American, and they really do, African American men who really do champion this work, but it's definitely a larger progressive moment in Berkeley, but contentious. So it's like 5 to 4 all the time.
So I'm wondering if some of this disjunction that we sense in that mural is sort of maybe coming from Bearden's own observations and maybe the city's intentions, but the reality at the time, I'm not sure. I don't know.
No, that's a really nice idea. The fact that maybe we can see it not as so as an art historian, you always want to like give the benefit of the doubt, not say. I try not to be a connoisseur kind of art historian, like this is better, this is less good, but to figure out why it looks the way it looks.
Yeah.
Yeah. To figure out what kinds of pressures he was up against in the city. Yeah.
You're right, Berkeley was crazy in 1973.
Yeah, do you know
I was in grade school in Berkeley, and I think that you're right, Berkeley was trying to tell a story about itself in a very idealistic way, and in a way I think that Bearden might have been a little intimidated by being brought in for 10 days, and they're saying all this to him.
This is his first public art project.
Yeah, my dad is actually a professor, and he's actually in that.
You have to show me where, okay.
And I saw it at the museum. So yeah, Berkeley was crazy. And I think that anybody who would have said no, or would have said, we don't like it, would have been jumped on. So they probably were very quiet about that because it was such a progressive step to hire an African-American artist. And we're making this big statement. Anybody who said no would have been, absolutely excoriated. And for both sides.
Yeah, and I think I can flesh that out both in terms of what's happening in Berkeley city politics and also what's happening in collections around Berkeley, because this is a period, Raymond Saunders and Gordon, they're both contacted because they're helping the Berkeley Art Museum fill out a collection of African American art, which is why we have Betty Sars and Jemima, for example, as they tell the NEA that they have to buy it for Berkeley. So it's a larger moment of trying to fill out that story, I think, in Berkeley. Mm-hmm.
Since we're all thinking about this together, thanks for the context for the view of the time, but it is at the same time difficult to imagine that this would be particularly controversial for all of the things we're describing, that there's like the tumult of different people and news-style photographs that's perfectly contained by a placid bay, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't a particularly uprising-oriented image in any way. It seems very palatable. So maybe the aesthetic.
Yeah, and I've been trying to think through maybe if there's something.
Image composition doesn't strike me as all that.
Mm-hmm. My students are very worried. What's controversial to them is why there is no Golden Gate Bridge. They're like, what? So I think maybe there's something in the way that the bay is framed too, because we think of the Golden Gate Bridge as like a progression. I don't know. I'm still worried about. Did you have?
But I think that the heads that are aligned, I mean, you could certainly engage them from liberation graphics standpoint, because this kind of abstraction of persons to suggest humanity rising up, the proletariat, global proletariat, is straight out of like tricontinental music.
Yeah, so maybe that's why they're taking it as a symbol, and it's a symbol that's lost some of its relevance for us today. Mm-hmm. Did you have something to add?
No, it's just back on the way in which the sort of tumult of the picture, might suggest the tumult of meetings in City Hall, but it sort of reifies it or softens it so that it's okay to yell at City Hall. It gives it a place.
Right.
It's sort of, I'm not sure what the word would be, it sort of transmogrifies or transforms dissent and anger and hostility into, a composite, jagged, but harmonized picture.
Exactly, and that's what people are celebrating about it, that it's positive and harmonious, even in its disjunction. So I think that exactly is what Berkeley wants, because this is the People's Park moment. There's a lot of stuff going on in Berkeley. Thank you guys, those were great ideas. If you have any more, feel free to tell me about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren.